Welcome everybody to our webinar. We are excited to have all of you here. And I'm Ben Newton from Sumo Logic, and I'm very excited about this webinar today. I don't know about you guys, but Logs for Dogs may be the best webinar title of any webinar I've been part of, so I think you have a lot of good stuff to look forward to. And we're really excited that Dave Bullock, the Director of Engineering from WAG Labs, is going to be talking, and I think you'll very quickly understand the dog connection. So we're looking forward to this content today. Now, to get started, before we get going, one housekeeping item. I just wanted you guys to know, first of all, this Dave actually presented at our Illuminate user conference. And so you can actually go and view that video as well, but he added content here just specifically for this webinar. So both of them are a little different. So you're definitely getting something extra special today. And if you have any questions, we would love those, and you can ask those in the chat. So please do that as we go along, and we will be taking a break partway through to answer questions and at the end. So please take advantage of that if there's anything that you are interested in knowing more about. Now, if we go to the next slide here, I just want to talk a little bit about Sumo Logic, then I want to hand it over to Dave. So for those of you who are not very familiar with us, Sumo Logic is a cloud-native secure analytics platform. So we are all about helping our customers improve the experience of their customers. And there's really three ways that we do that, three key use cases. One is just helping you with operations, helping you with IT operations and DevOps and being able to improve the performance of your application, reduce downtime, have with real-time monitoring, and being able to really efficiently optimize your troubleshooting experience. And secondly, we can help you ensure security and compliance, specifically around improving your security posture with having really high-powered security forensics and being able to investigate security issues, as well as reducing the cost and effort that you have to do to stay compliant and working with your auditors. And then finally, where we really want to be spending, I'm sure you guys want to be spending your time, is making the experience better for your customers, helping you get insight into what's going on with your app and what's going on with your users so that you can improve the product and make a better experience, and also move that information to the rest of the organization. And we've been doing this for over, we've been doing this for a decade, and we've worked with a lot of companies that you recognize. I'm sure a lot of those logos you see there, like Airbnb and MLB and Samsung SmartThings, a lot of products that you may use yourself. And so we're really excited to have a very diverse customer base and some really interesting use cases. So without any further ado, I definitely want to hand over to Dave here, and take it away, Dave. Excited to see what you're going to talk to us about.
Awesome. Thanks, Ben. So as Ben mentioned, my name is Dave Bullock. I'm the Director of Engineering at WAG Labs. A little bit about WAG. So we are an on-demand dog walking, sitting, and boarding platform. Basically, at any time you can fire up the app and request a dog walk for your fur baby, sitting or boarding over the weekend when you're out of town, all that kind of good stuff. We're in 43 states in over 100 cities. We're expanding that all the time and growing. So definitely check to see if we're available in your area, and hope you choose to use our application and enjoy the experience we provide. So we basically, our main goal is to bring happiness to dogs and their humans. So we do that in a number of different ways. As mentioned, we're growing like crazy, which also means we're hiring like crazy. So if you know any engineers who are looking for work, check out our jobs page. Most of all, we love dogs and dog walking. So let's talk a little bit about our journey here. So before Sumo Logic, we started using Sumo Logic about 6 months ago. And before Sumo, we had kind of logs in all these different places. So basically, hundreds of servers, application logs. We didn't have a single cohesive place to view logs, to kind of search for information in the logs, to analyze our logs, to alert based on problems that we would find. So really just all these different places, on servers, we didn't have a cohesive view. So this caused a number of problems. We had difficulty in tracking down production issues. So if something would go wrong, it would be hard to kind of get a single view of what was going on and figure out how to fix it. We had a lack of visibility over our entire stack. And we had difficulty in detecting anomalies and outliers. When you have data in all these different places, it's hard to have a single view and kind of see the different things that affect each other. We had delayed alerting just because there were different systems that were processing logs and metrics, and we just didn't have a single global log search available. So after Sumo Logic, we have a much better outlook. So let's kind of take a look at what we have. So we have a single pane of glass that gives us monitoring for all of our systems. So what you're looking at here is basically all of our metrics feeding into a single place. You can see in the kind of upper left-hand corner there, you can see our ECS cluster when we're switching between our blue-green deployments, the load transfer from one to another. You can see things auto-scale. You can see our database load, including some little spikes there on our OLAP analytics, which obviously weren't serious. Requests to our load balancer, all in like a single pane of glass view. So this gives us a single cohesive place to view system performance, application performance, system logs, application logs, and then security, and really everything in one place, which made it much easier to deal with issues, to ensure that the health of our systems, to optimize things, to know when things are getting too hot before they become problems, and to just generally track down all different issues. So our system performance, we have a nice clear view of what's going on with everything. So whether there's spikes in errors in the load balancer, whether there's, Redis doesn't have enough memory, it's all available in one place so we can proactively take action when we see issues. Similar with our application itself. So when we have jobs backing up in the queue, hot API calls, everything shows up in one place and allows us to really to dig in and have a much deeper vision into our overall health of our systems. The ability to just search through system logs for information. So, Sumo Logic really makes a super simple interface to digging into everything in your system. So pretty much instant results for searches across our entire application. And really powerful, intelligent ways of sorting through and digging through things. Same with our application logs. So we can instantly see, searching through our app logs and finding any kind of issues or looking for specific results. It's all right there. Also, really nice security view of a single pane of glass security. So out of the box, Sumo Logic gives you the CrowdStrike database. So we feed in all of our VPC flow logs. We actually only feed in any kind of external to our VPC IPs, but through that we can see any kind of malicious bad actors who are trying to do things to our systems and take action against them really quick. And really, we can really find all the things. So one thing that our app allows you to do is as the walker is walking your dog, they'll flag when your dog goes to the bathroom. And you can see here some just in a short window of some flagged dog poos or pees. So I think we were going to open it up to some questions right now, if there are any.
Yeah, thank you, David. Let me. We got a couple things here that came up. So one thing you talked a little bit about, you had logs all over the place, and then you brought Sumo Logic to kind of bring those together. What were you using before Sumo Logic? Was it nothing, or did you have a couple tools in place? What were you using?
Yeah, so we had a few tools in place. We used Papertrail, which I think when we chose it, I think it was a good fit for us. We've been around for about 3 years. In the beginning, it worked well enough, but as we grew and scaled, it just ended up not being sufficient for us. And we were only sending our application logs to Papertrail. We also use just logs on servers and grepping through them, which is obviously not an effective means of locating things. So those tools didn't really give us that cohesive look across all of our systems, and didn't include metrics. So the ability to include metrics and show them side by side with logs is super, super helpful.
And you talk a little bit more about that. What has that been able to help you do, Dave, that you weren't able to do before?
Sure. So we can correlate errors with spikes in performance. So before we would have one dashboard that would show like our AWS CloudWatch showing like systems with heavy load, but we wouldn't be able to like necessarily correlate that quickly with like application logs, error messages, things like that. And so having it all in kind of like this nice dashboard makes it much more powerful for us.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Basically being able to solve problems quicker, which means assume that your customers are going to be happier because they're going to have less problems on their side. One thing, transitioning a little bit here too, you mentioned security there, and you talked about the threat intelligence database that Summa Logic provides. So in particular for you, does that mean that you guys are working with your security team on that? Or how does that look from your side? Does that help to actually provide value to other teams at WAG?
100%. So our security team absolutely utilizes Summa Logic as well. So as I mentioned, we pipe in all of our logs from our VPC that has an external IP in it. And then that allows our security team to keep a real-time eye on any kind of threats that are heating up, take action and block them on our WAF. And we also we send logs from our firewalls as well from our internal systems, so our IT team uses it as well. So it's definitely very, very powerful for us.
Okay, great. Now we had another question come in here about how you're using Summa Logic with configuration management. I believe that's one of the things you're going to be talking about coming up, right?
Absolutely. So we're a Terraform shop, and so we deploy our full infrastructure using Terraform and GitLab, and that includes Summa Logic. So we have a number of Terraform modules that we use to deploy the Lambda functions for consuming our logs. So in our base systems, we bake in the Sumo collectors. So we fully use configuration management to manage the whole system, including the Summa Logic integration.
Great. Well, I guess on that note, why don't we just keep going? Let's talk a little bit more about your journey to get there.
Absolutely. So to the journey. So let's talk a little bit about how we got from kind of having our logs all over the place to kind of having this kind of cohesive single pane of glass view. So a big part of this transition was getting our infrastructure under automation. So when I came to WAG about 7 months ago, about a year ago, we kind of had we had some automation, but the systems really were kind of deployed manually. There wasn't infrastructure as code. So part of this journey has been changing that as well. So we use Terraform to fully manage our infrastructure. We do CI/CD for both our application and our infrastructure using GitLab. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next coming slides. We've baked in logging throughout the entire process on every system, through every metric, through everything using Summa Logic. We package and deploy our application using Ansible and Packer. And then we do, as I mentioned earlier, like a blue, green, and canary deployment using ECS, Route 53, and HA proxy. And then the whole thing just auto scales with ECS. And a big part of this is we talked a little bit about security. Everything has been built with security first, thinking about least permissive connections between the VPC, subnet groups, lockdown security groups, just everything. We take security very seriously, and so we make sure that we design everything thinking security as the first step. And a big part of that is both logging and alerting based on the CrowdStrike database, which is super helpful. Okay, so Terraform. We went with Terraform for a number of reasons. It's simple, it's really elegant, and it's just a very powerful system. For those of you who aren't familiar with Terraform, it's from HashiCorp. It enables you to safely and predictably create, change, and improve infrastructure. it's open source infrastructure as code. It's declarative. It allows us to follow the full software development lifecycle for our infrastructure. So obviously we follow the software development lifecycle for our application, but thanks to Terraform, we do the same thing with our infrastructure, which basically means that we're able to, cut a branch, make some changes, test them in our local sandboxes, commit the changes, do a code review. If the code review passes, then we merge it, and then we stage all the changes in a staging environment. We then run tests against that staging environment to make sure everything looks proper. And then if so, we promote it to our, to the next step, and we get notifications in Slack. That's, here's what's going to change, and if all is good, we apply it. And that all happens through GitLab, and I'll show some slides about that in a minute. And basically, it's allowed us to just not click around in the AWS console. So, a lot of the stuff that we had deployed previously had been done manually. Makes it really hard to repeat changes and to safely, test and scale. This has fixed all those problems. So here's a look at some Terraform code. It's pretty elegant and clean. I think it looks a lot like JSON, except it's kind of human readable and human usable. It's much more forgiving. You can see here, this is where we're actually deploying our Lambda function that consumes our VPC logs. So pretty straightforward how it all works. It has really allowed us to improve our infrastructure and make it more repeatable, secure, extensible, and it's been really a good thing for us. So coupled with Terraform, we also use GitLab. GitLab is a kind of a full stack code system. It allows you to do everything from CI/CD to hosting your Git repo to things that we don't actually use but are in there, like ticketing and auto DevOps, which we haven't moved into yet. But it's a very, very powerful system, and I encourage you guys to check it out if you haven't seen it before. As I mentioned, we kind of follow the Git flow of cutting a branch and making changes, testing in our local sandboxes. When I say local sandbox, it's actually like a separate AWS account that each DevOps engineer has. Allows us to do code reviews. We automate the staging of the code once things are merged into master. Automate the testing as well, so it has runners that we can use to both deploy Terraform and to test the changes that we're deploying. Permits change control, so whenever changes are about to be made, we get notifications in Slack. They have to be approved, and then things get merged and infrastructure changes. And it really allows for kind of one-click deployment of both our application and infrastructure. So here's a little screenshot of our pipeline. So this is our GitLab infrastructure pipeline, and you can see that in each stage, these are all pipelines that run, and they all have to complete before they move on to the next stage. And basically, what happens is an auto-scaling runner fires up. So it's an EC2 instance that just fires up on demand. We always have a little pool of them ready to go. But you can see each stage here. So first stage, we verify the Terraform syntax. So obviously, we don't want to do anything if the syntax is bad. Next stage is we check for any security changes. So if NACLs or security groups change, we send off a notification to our security team that they should be reviewing this. Those aren't blocking changes; those just send notifications. In this next stage, we actually pull the app. So we have as I mentioned, we have a Dockerized application for our actual API, and so we pull that app in from production. We actually pull two flavors of it, and then we to use in our staging infrastructure to test to make sure that the changes that we're making aren't breaking anything. Next, we stage the infrastructure. So any changes will automatically get applied to our staging environment. So this is fully automatic. There's no checks or balances here. They just get applied. Finally, we actually test that stage infrastructure. So we load in those images that we pull into our ECS cluster, and we run tests against both the blue and green of master and develop to make sure that the application still works. Now here's the kind of the review stage. So we then run Terraform plan against all of these, and if we detect any changes that are being made in any piece of our infrastructure, we then alert out into Slack and say, hey, we're seeing this change, like review it and make sure that this is what you really want. And then finally, this is where you click to deploy. So once you've reviewed those changes, you'll then click to deploy the infrastructure, and then it'll get applied. And so here's a little Slack message that we see. That apply changes button doesn't actually really apply them. It takes you back to this previous page here, and then you have to click that play button. We felt it was a little bit dangerous to just have it go right to the play. But this tells you, like, we're gonna change these things in our global infrastructure. So that's GitLab. So Summa Logic. We ingest all of our logs into CloudWatch first. In a few cases, we use the local Sumo collector, but in our ECS cluster, we use the CloudWatch agent. We're probably going to change that at some point soon, but it's working okay for us now. We consume those CloudWatch logs with a Lambda function, which we then send them to Summa Logic. We kind of clean up. We've modified the default Sumo Lambda function a little bit to kind of condense the logs, clean them up a little bit. In the case of the VPC flow logs, we've extended the Sumo Lambda function to only send flow logs that have an IP address outside of our CIDR blocks or outside of our VPC CIDR blocks. So that way, we're only sending external threats really. And we do that just because we have it was a very high volume of VPC flow logs, and that let us cut it down by like 95%, just because we have a lot of internal VPC traffic that we don't, we definitely save that forever, but we don't send it to Sumo. We could if we needed to analyze it more deeply, but the way we do it now, we just send the external stuff. And as I mentioned, everything is baked into Terraform. So as we roll out new services or systems, they automatically have this kind of logging pipeline built into them. We use a combination of Ansible and Packer to build our base images. So we have a number of base images for different systems. We treat our servers for the most part as cattle, not pets. But some of them are long-running systems. But for the most part, our application itself is a Docker image, and we build that Docker image using a combination of Ansible and Packer. So we create both AMIs and Docker images with Packer. We push them up to ECR, and then GitLab pulls the image, bakes in the application code, no secrets, no configuration. We pull that in the process later using Chamber and SSM. Terraform pulls that image, as you saw, and then pushes into cold ECR for deployment. And part of that is that we have a full blue-green canary, blue-green and canary deployments. Excuse me one second. So we have two clusters, a blue and a green cluster for our API. For other systems, like for our workers, it's just a single cluster. But the blue-green cluster, before our deployment, we'll scale up either the blue or green cluster. We'll load the image into it, and it allows us to basically really quickly switch between active and inactive clusters. So if something is amiss during a deployment, we see a spike in load, or we see anomalies in Sumo, we'll quickly switch back to our inactive cluster. We can also test features in a full production environment before sending any traffic. So as we load into that inactive cluster, we can access that with our application and make sure that everything is working properly. The canary deployment, we can send 1% or even less to the new version, and again monitor Sumo Logic for any kind of anomalies or errors. And we can quickly and cleanly roll back if there are any problems. Once we've cut over, everything's passed smoke tests and everything's looking good, we scale down the inactive cluster using GitLab and Terraform. So this is kind of like what the infrastructure looks like. So basically, we have an external ALB, and we have a layer of HA proxy. The only reason we have that layer of HA proxy is because Amazon ALBs can't target a CNAME. So we can't use Route 53 internally to switch between our clusters. And so we don't trust Route 53 going out to the world and, AT&T or Comcast respecting our TTL on the active system. So we only use that Route 53 weighted CNAME internally for Canary and Bluegreen. So you'll see there's a second ALB that will then connect to our blue cluster in this case. And as you see here, everything that we've built is multi-AZ, so it's highly available. And then here's what it looks like when it switches over. So just all that's happening here is a Route 53 CNAME is the weight is changing. And again, we do that all through Terraform and GitLab. Again, we use ECS. Everything auto-scales. So we scale both the cluster instances and the tasks, and we scale based on CPU and memory. Once we've deployed, we fully scale. Before deployment, we fully scale up the cold cluster. So outside of our deployment windows, that cluster has 0 instances, it's costing us $0. And then we fully scale down the newly cold cluster after deployment and after the smoke test has passed. This has saved us a ton of money. That in combination with just using auto scaling in general has massively cut down our AWS bill. And that in combination with reserved instances has taken it down even farther. So you can see here what the scaling itself looks like. And you can see that our load is pretty consistently is low at night, just because people don't tend to get their dogs walked during the middle of the night. So I guess like the takeaways are, do the right thing when building or expanding your infrastructure. So building a scalable, stable, cost-effective, secure platform, it's not easy, but it's definitely worth it. And I think the three main ways to do that is to make sure that everything is managed as code. So infrastructure is code. Automate all the things. If you're doing something manually, that should be a smell and that you don't like, and you should figure out a way to automate around that. And just make sure you log everything. So log everything, get it in a place where you can analyze it, and you'll be in a much better place. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. Once again, I'm Dave Bullock, Director of Engineering at WAG Labs, and appreciate your time today, and I'm ready to answer some questions.
Thanks, Dave. That was great. I appreciate you going into that level of detail. So we've got a bunch of great questions on here. Anybody listening now, please keep putting them in. We definitely have time for questions here. So one question that came up, Dave, was about how you integrated Summa Logic with Terraform and the Terraform template. So you talked a little bit about sending logs to CloudWatch. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that. Why? So there are templates out there for putting Summa Logic agents as part of collectors as part of the deployment process. But you guys decided to go through CloudWatch first and then go through Lambda. So talk a little bit about why you guys decided to do that way versus one of the other different ways you could have done it.
Yeah, so originally we were using agents on the containers, and we made a decision we wanted to put the logs into CloudWatch first. I think we might change our mind on that at some point soon. It's adding a layer of cost and complexity that we don't need. So that's something that we actually have some tickets in our backlog to change, and shouldn't be too hard to adjust it just because everything is it's all code, and we can make a change pretty easily.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes a lot of sense, and actually that reminds me of something that you said before that I wanted you to dig into a little bit more about this. So you talked about logging being baked in, and so you talked about how you automate that. But one thing I think would be pretty interesting, particularly based on your kind of position at the organization, So how do you work with your development teams about incorporating logging into their strategies they're building an application? So, as a former product manager myself, I know that was always something that would come up, is like, how do we figure out what to log beforehand and how to log it and what information we need before we get down and there's a outage and I was like, oops, we don't have that information. So how have you thought about that in terms of as you guys have grown as an organization?
Absolutely. So, when I started, we were logging a lot of things. They just weren't necessarily the right things, and we were logging things at levels that weren't accurate depictions of like what was actually happening. So, in each stage of the kind of development lifecycle, you need kind of different levels of logging. So as you're developing things locally, you might want to log everything that's happening, right? Like just way overkill, debug level logging. And that's fine, but we don't want to be sending that stuff, to Sumo Logic in production. That would just be very cost prohibitive and it wouldn't be a helpful thing. So I think one big thing that we've worked on over the last few months is to really differentiate between the different levels of logging, of debug, of info, of alert, of critical, and kind of right-sized our logging paradigm. And so I feel like we've done a good job of that. And I think that another thing too is that I haven't talked about too much is Sumo's metric collection. And so currently we mostly just collect metrics through AWS and send them send the CloudWatch metrics. But we've recently been instrumenting different applications using the Sumo's actual metric collection. And I think that's going to be really helpful for us kind of like tracking application health and system health throughout the system. So that's kind of like our next big step is to get a lot more of that instrumentation in there.
And how are you doing that, Dave? Are you doing that through the open API, or how are you getting that data into Sumo, the new metric?
Yeah. So currently we're using the API, but we're looking at different ways to kind of collect that and send it like in a batch.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And so, and for those of you who are not entirely familiar, just to give you some context, part of what this is with Sumo Logic, you can collect logs and performance metrics from a lot of different solutions. So, in a lot of different places is what I meant to say. And I think one of those things, particularly with our open APIs, you can actually set up a cloud API and you can programmatically send that data there, and you can actually send unstructured logs as well as these very structured metrics, and it's very easy to set up. But then you can also pull it from CloudWatch as well. So there's a lot of different routes that you can take to get that data in there. Now there was a related question here that just came up, and thanks everybody for putting these questions in. They're great. So we've talked a little bit about really performance management and kind of more traditional, even more infrastructure operations and infrastructure automation. How do you think about application performance management? Are you using a solution there as well, or do you find you have the tools that you need to do what you need to do?
Yeah, so I snuck it in one of the first slides. We use New Relic, but I think we definitely want to kind of expand our APM to be more customized and kind of really focus on the parts that we care about. So I think that kind of goes back to the instrumenting our application for metrics. And we're still looking at different solutions to do that. But we like open tracing. There's a bunch of different options out there, so we're definitely looking at that right now.
Okay, great. Yeah, and for those again you listening and watching this later, we have a lot of our customers end up using New Relic and Sumo Logic together, and we have a lot of customers that are doing things with open tracing or with AWS X-Ray. So I think there's a lot of different options. A lot of it's going to depend on you doing exactly what Dave's talking about and figuring out the right solution for you. But we have integrations directly with New Relic, and we're actually going to be doing more there very soon. So moving on to another great question here is you talked a lot about AWS. Have you guys in terms of your longer term strategy, have you guys thought about other cloud platforms than AWS and doing multi-cloud, or potentially distributing some of your load across multiple clouds, or are you guys fully in on AWS?
We're currently fully in on AWS, but we've looked at GCP, especially for some of their machine learning offerings. We don't have any current plans to move anywhere, but the one nice thing about having all of our infrastructure managed through Terraform is it makes it really easy to transition to a different provider. So if we had built out all of our automation using CloudFormation, it would be a pretty hard lift to move to another system. But thanks to kind of the Terraform and using GitLab for deployment, we can be somewhat agnostic. I mean, obviously, it's not just changing one line of code, but at least we'd be able to use the same code base as a starting point. But that being said, we don't have any current plans to move out of AWS.
Okay, and that's great. And there was a question about whether you guys are using multiple accounts within Sumo Logic, but I believe you guys put everything into a single account within Sumo Logic, correct?
Yeah, in Summa Logic we have a single account and we partition everything and assign access rights based on those partitions. We also, I think another question about the account strategy on the AWS side is that we actually do use separate AWS accounts for both production, staging. Each of our DevOps engineers has their own AWS account, and they're all underneath the umbrella organizational account.
Oh, and I think that's a great point, Dave, because what we see a lot of customers do is that you can have multiple different collection points that are going to different AWS credentialed different AWS accounts and pulling that data in and pull it all into Sumo Logic, and then you can use the robust role-based access control mechanisms that you have at your fingertips to control who has access to what data and what dashboards they have access to and things like that. So what we found, particularly since we released a lot of the role-based access control, which I think was before you guys became a customer, right around that time, most of our customers don't feel, that have like a single organization, don't feel like they need to have multiple Sumo Logic accounts. Sometimes when they have very advanced requirements, they may do that, but for the most part, most customers can do everything they need to do within a single account on Sumo. So
yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, please.
I was going to say, just with the source category and partitioning, we're able to really separate things, and the role-based authentication makes it really easy for us to grant access. So yeah, single Sumo account works great for us, and the separate AWS accounts are super important for us as well.
Yeah, that's great. So one thing that you talked about as well, you talked a lot about ECS, and we've talked a little bit about this before, is that things have been changing very rapidly over the last couple of years around containerization with what Docker's doing and with Kubernetes, and now you have the Kubernetes service EKS on AWS. So how are you thinking about your containerized and microservice architecture strategy going forward?
Yeah, absolutely. So as mentioned, we're currently using ECS, but in the next, I believe it's next quarter, we're gonna start experimenting with EKS. I've been using Kubernetes for a long time, so I think that's like the next logical step for us.
Okay, and what, and in particular, what a lot of people are doing that, but for you personally, as kind of a veteran of this, why is it important for you to make the transition? What's driving that transition for you?
I think just the transition from kind of having a monolithic application to having the microservice-based system is going to be it's going to be enabled by using the Kubernetes. It'll make it much easier for us to kind of spread out our application from what is currently like a single large API to the different services that it needs to be. Okay,
and is that connect with going back to the multi-cloud question as well, as if you guys ever decide to do that, I would expect that adopting Kubernetes would actually make that easier as well if you guys decided ever in the future to do more of a multi-cloud strategy, right?
I mean, definitely having everything in Kubernetes will make it much easier to move to something like GCP. Absolutely.
Okay, great. And so one question too about you again talked a little bit about security. And I just want to ask that again. So, particularly with the way you guys are working, I mean, you're you're really a picture of best practice around DevOps automation, and you talked about baking security in. So talk a little bit more about that. What does it actually mean to bake in security from your perspective as part of this whole end-to-end process?
Sure. So, it all starts with kind of the least permissive controls. So we, as we, build out our infrastructure, every tier of our system, whether it's the database or the cache or, the application or the workers, the load balancers, they're all separated into their own VPC subnet group, and only the traffic that needs to be from one of those tiers to another tier is permitted. And then as another layer on the security onion, we lock down each of those systems to only have the ports open that they need through security groups. So right there's two layers of security there. As part of our deployment process, we're constantly baking the base image with the latest versions of the operating system, the software. So we're constantly rolling out new versions of our application with the latest operating system. And if there's as part of that pipeline, we can that base image builds every night. But if we needed to trigger, if there was a serious security issue that we needed to trigger a build, we could do that right away. And then we send all of our VPC flow logs. We have VPC flow logs turned on all systems, which basically tracks in and out traffic through the VPC. We send all that with any external IP to Sumo and correlate it with the CrowdStrike database. And so if we see any anomalies, if we see all of a sudden a big spike in traffic from malicious IPs, we'll block that using our web application firewall.
Okay, no, that's great. And by the way, are you and your team primarily responsible for those security requirements? Does that kind of go through your team, or is there another team you work with?
We work with the security team, but basically we're responsible for implementing it.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, one additional question was, do you ever find Terraform lags behind the cloud provider changes and new features?
Yeah, I think that whenever Amazon releases new functionality, there's always going to be some short lag between when they update the provider. That being said, it's usually very short, and you can also use Terraform with CloudFormation if you have to. So if you had to, as a stopgap, do something in CloudFormation, you could automate that with Terraform as well.
Okay, that's great. So one last question before we move on. So what's next? What's the next big project or thing you're going to try to tackle as a team related to what we're talking about here?
Sure. So yeah, I think the next big thing is the Kubernetes migration, and I think that'll be a fun project for the whole team, and we're looking forward to that.
Okay, great. Yeah, and I think as part of, since we talked to Kubernetes a couple times here, for everybody on that's listening in or watching this later, there's a very straightforward integration with Kubernetes for Summa Logic, as well as EKS, GKS, AKS. So there's a lot of different ways for you to get that data in, and we're seeing a lot of adoption of Kubernetes. So with that, and again, thank you, Dave. This was a fantastic presentation, and somebody asked about whether the slides are going to be made available. They are, and then you can always reach out to us for more information. And for those of you who are going to reInvent, AWS reInvent, we are going to be there, and Dave is actually going to be presenting again in our booth. So if you want to meet him in person, I encourage you to come to our booth at reInvent, and you can meet me, some other people on the team, and you'll be able to meet Dave. If I remember correctly, I think he's actually presenting on it's either the Wednesday or Thursday after lunch. Definitely come by. Okay, so just to round this out, and this is actually a good transition based on what Dave was saying. One of the things we try to do with Summa Logic is we love data, and we love getting data to you that's useful and that you find to be helpful in your day-to-day job and actually trying to do the things you need to do and be more effective at those. And one of the things we produce is called the Modern App Report. And so this is a freely downloadable report we released a few months ago. And what we do every year is that we look at our customers, we talk to our customers, and we actually measure how they're using the platform. And we look to see how both customers like Dave at WAG as well as customers kind of across the board, all the way from more traditional customers like Anheuser-Busch to Airbnb and all these different customers we have, and we want to see how they're building out their stacks and how they're actually thinking about these new technologies and what they're adopting, and then we provide that to you as a download that you can take a look at and hopefully get some usefulness out of it. So I thought just in these last couple of minutes here I'd give you some examples of some things you can look at. So one, for example, I think is kind of fun is to look at the databases that we see on AWS. So we can see what people are actually monitoring, and we're actually working on some things now where we can see what technologies they're using together as groups, and that's something you'll actually see from us coming soon. But in particularly here in the report, maybe this is not so surprising to the people on the phone, but you can see that the top databases on AWS are not necessarily your traditional Oracle, SQL Server, things like that. You can see those are down near the middle, and it's also not the some of the other databases that have been around. It's actually these open source databases like MySQL, Redis, Postgres, also things like Mongo, DB, Dynamo, using different services on AWS like Redshift and Cassandra. So you can see there that there's a significant adoption in those, and the more traditional databases and some of the ones that have kind of gone to the wayside are significantly less. Now, particular for our discussion here, we also looked at how ECS and native Kubernetes is being adopted. It was a little bit too early to look at EKS and services like that because they've literally just been released. But you can see here that both our more traditional ECS, container management, it was increasing significantly from 14 to 20% in our customer base. But as well as native Kubernetes. Now maybe next year we'll see more of a transfer from Kubernetes, over to Kubernetes from ECS and things like that. But it's definitely interesting to see how that continues to accelerate. And then finally, you can also see on with Lambda as just another example, you can see that Lambda use has gone from just 12% of our customers to over almost a third of our customers are using that. So I definitely encourage you guys. You can see the link on the page here. You'll see it in the presentations. You can just go to the website and look, or just search for Summa Logic Modern App Report. I definitely suggest you check that out. And Dave, thank you again for a wonderful presentation, and thank you for everyone who attended. And please go check us out. Go sign up for a free 30-day trial. Try out Summa Logic and see if it will work for you. And we'd love to work with you. And thank you everybody for your time.